Hi, I'm James Thomas, and welcome to the Life to the Full video, YouTube, and podcast. And it's a place for those of you who've got just great dreams to live our best for God, to lead meaningful, exciting lives that impact the world and help those friends and family around us. And today is our second guest interview, and I'm really excited to invite Simon Dinning to join us today to look at one of the gifts of the Spirit. And for each of these, we're looking at the different gifts of the Spirit. And for each of them, I'm interviewing somebody who definitely has that gift, who God has gifted in this way. And we're just going to have some fun exploring the gifts and exploring how that has worked through in the life of Simon Dinning. Simon,
Hi,
thanks
James.
so much for joining us today. I'm so grateful you can join us and help us to understand the gift of teaching better. And I just think about that. I and many disciples and Christians just want to have better quiet times. We want to understand and love and know the Bible better, and to be more effective at using that Bible to teach our friends and family and those around us. And it's been great to get to know you better over the last year. It's not been that long, really.
No, that's right.
But I've attended some of your classes to the UK and to the South Side, and they've been great. And seen your YouTube channel, and I'm always really impressed by that.
Thanks, James.
Yeah, and not just how you teach, but how the Word of God is just on your heart all the time. But I thought we'd start probably with just finding out a bit more about you. So Simon, welcome. And I'd like to start by asking you, how did you become a Christian in the first place?
Well, thanks so much, James. Thanks so much for the great introduction as well. How did I become a Christian in the first place? I'm a Christian 21 years this August. I was brought up as a Catholic in Northern Ireland, and I always went to church. We went especially at special times of the year. So I was always thinking about God. I was always thinking about the deeper meaning of life. However, I suppose troubles come in life as you get older. Things don't quite work out the way you expect them to. You have troubles and challenges in your life. You suffer grief and loss, and you start to ask the bigger questions. And I think you see that what you were following seems a bit hollow in that it doesn't really have any depth. I wasn't really following the teachings of what I was hearing every week, and it really was just a tradition. I really was just doing what everybody had always done. So I started asking more questions, but at the same time, I was enjoying nightclubs and chasing after things that I thought would fulfill me. Things like girlfriends, things like drinking, having more friends, being popular, going to nightclubs. That was the sort of thing I was doing. So I did start asking questions, and I do remember specifically praying, God, if you are there and you are real, please show me, guide me to you. And I think as a result of that, I did end up meeting someone. I moved to Belfast from Larne, which was just a town in Northern Ireland, to the city on my own at 18. And then I was met by someone on the street, a guy called Danny McElroy met me on the street and gave me his card and invited me to church. And at that particular point, I wasn't interested. I had a perception of Christianity, but I still had all the questions about life, what it was all about. Is this true? So for about a year, I was reading into Nostradamus. I was reading about other religions. I was looking into Catholicism and Christianity in general. But I had this card in the drawer that this guy, Danny, had given to me. And about a year after he gave the card to me, I started thinking, right, I need to go along and check out churches, because I really believe that Jesus seems to be the common denominator with everything I'm learning about. And therefore, I want to go and investigate Christianity, because I don't really feel like I gave it a try, despite being brought up as a Catholic. So I opened my drawer about a year later, and I picked out the card, and I phoned the same person that invited me a year before. Came along. I remember going to study with him, and I brought about 6 books myself, because I had started reading and learning myself about everything. But I had lots of questions. It took a few months. I kept trying to go back to the world, because it was too hard to admit my sin, to recognize my weaknesses, to tell all my friends I was changing and becoming a Christian. But God kept on putting people on my path. He kept on working out different situations. that meant I just simply could not turn my back on it. Studied the Bible, became a Christian, and again, that's 21 years this August. So that's a bit of a very rough summary of my story, I suppose.
Wow. Well, that's kind of extraordinary. I mean, so I've never heard of anybody having a card in their drawer for a year. I've never heard of anybody coming along to a first Bible study with 6 books as well. So that's they must have been a bit. Danny must have been a bit shocked when you turned up after a year, was he? Or
he was. He actually didn't know who I was. He had no recollection of inviting me. They were about to move out of the house that they lived in at the time, and they gave me a landline number. So if I had phoned it 1 week later, in fact, 3 or 4 days later, they wouldn't have been there anymore. So it was only the last 3 or 4 days. So he was shocked, completely shocked as to who I was. He thought it was some kind of joke. And actually, after I phoned him to meet up to look into what the Bible said, I then stood him up the first time.
right.
And I tried to on other occasions. I mustered up the courage to phone him, and then I pulled back again, stepped forward, pulled back again. And it's almost like God kept kind of dangling a carrot and saying, come on out, Simon, come and check this out. But I kept giving in to fear. But eventually we did end up studying. And I'd say it took a couple of months, and I came up with many books because I'd been reading so much myself, and I wasn't willing to just accept what anybody was going to tell me, because I knew that everybody has their slant, especially Northern Ireland, very religious, many areas of Christianity. Everybody's got their slant, their drum that they bang, with their different doctrines. So I thought, no, I need to be fully convinced here. I'm not going to follow it because it feels good, or, because you tell me it's right. So I suppose I was a bit of a tricky person to study with, but he was the right person. Right. He was very, very much did not suffer fools. He told me exactly what I thought, and he called me out on many things that I was saying but wasn't following. Right. So that's what I needed. Yeah.
Great. And I mean, even from what you're talking about of kind of being into Nostradamus and these deep, it was obviously quite deep. What was your reaction when you started, when you were studying the Bible? Because you've obviously, it feels like you're very deep in your Bible study. So how was that from those initial studies, or where did that come out from?
Yeah, I got interested. I think one of the things I realized is that, am I being sincere in my life? I hear these things said at church, but then I don't put them into practice, and then I grumble because God doesn't seem to help me. And I thought, well, is he telling me something? A bit like your parent. Is my parent telling me to do something? Then I don't do it. Then I complain whenever it goes wrong. Mm-hmm. It's like, that doesn't seem to add up. So I actually have to confess, I went to my friend's house at the age of 16, and I lied to him about why I wanted a Bible. I knew he had a Bible on his shelf, and I didn't have one. And I told him I needed a Bible for my RE project in school, and it wasn't true. And he gave it to me. And whenever he handed it to me, he actually had almost uncovered what I was doing. And he said, "Are you sure you want this for an RE project?" I was like, yeah. So, and I got the Bible and I started reading it for the first time. And again, as I say, Danny at the time studied the Bible with me. I was just seeking truth. And my goal was like, if this is true, I'll do it. And if it's not true, forget it. I'll never pick it up again. It's either true or it's not. I'm not really interested in whether it gives me a better life or not. Although some element of my life was pain at the time. So I think I torture myself. I'm the why person. Why is this the case? Analyzing everything. I think I was tormented by my nature back in them days because I had nowhere to go with my analytical nature. But as I started to read and learn more, I started realizing, hold on, I can actually make sense of things if I invest in this. I think for many years before that, I had not really studied anything. I left school with no real qualifications because I was too busy playing football, training, or just running after the world. Like whatever I do, I give it 100%. I am not a middle of the road person. I'm absolutely all or nothing. So at that point, nothing was the best way to describe my studious nature, until the big questions came. And then that was the start of a new journey for me.
Yeah. Wow. Wow, that's fascinating. It is, and it's great to hear your story and where you come from. That's and it's fascinating to know even what you just said about, you know, leaving school without qualifications because you're so obsessed by focus on the football, and then how you've developed in this kind of very deep and academic. It's inspirational as well, I think.
Mm.
And your marriage, tell me how you met your wife in church.
Yeah, so married to Nadine. We're married nearly 17 years this October. Doesn't seem that long, but 17 years. And I think that, well, she came to church, and actually, well, how it came about is I invited her brother to church on the street, as we do, street evangelism. I met her brother Dale on the street, invited him to church, studied the Bible. He became a Christian. He started coming to church. So then Nadine came along to church to find out what's he doing. I'm worried about him, but at the same time slightly curious. So she came along to church. She had 2 kids already from a previous relationship. They were 1 and 2. Owen and Zara obviously became my stepchildren. So we met obviously through church. She was in church for about a year or more. I was interested in someone else before her for one reason or another. Then things didn't work out for lots of reasons. But then we ended up getting quite close. And what I appreciated about my wife, as well as being physically attractive, was the first main thing with Nadine was a really personality showing through, in the sense that she just has a wonderfully calm and reassuring personality. She's very different from me, much more patient, much more tolerant. She really is much more tolerant, actually, when I think about it. But just a really gentle, kind nature that I just appreciate it so much. I really love that about her. And I mean, many other things, but so yeah, almost 17 years now. Yeah, again, through inviting her brother to church. So it's a good story.
Congratulations. Yeah. And I really look forward to meeting her. She sounds amazing.
Yeah.
And yeah. And your children, they follow Christ. So could you say a little bit about what has helped you as a parent? And I thought particularly in a small church, because some people worry about you know, raising their children to become Christians in a small church.
Yeah. So yeah, I have 4 children now. I have the oldest is Owen, he's my stepson. He's 22, 23 this November. So 22, Zara's 21, then Sophie's 12, and Isabella is 6. The last 2 are my own kids. The oldest 2 are my stepkids. Owen's a disciple now. He got baptized about 5 or 6 years ago, and then Zara got baptized, and then Sophie got baptized at 12. Incredibly deep girl. I think I mean, obviously it's a learning experience. You make lots of mistakes. You really do. So I think having the humility to ask questions of other people and finding out what helps other people, especially people who are in your predicament, maybe a blended family like mine, and just getting input. I think everything will usually spring from not how God is working in you. So I think for me personally, one of the things I tried to model and grow in as a dad, step parent, was to try and be as humble as possible. Like, be honest about my own mistakes, you know, be as real with the kids as possible. And I always remember with the kids, many people will obviously try to do this, is the more you talk to them when they're young, the more they'll talk to you when they're older. So if you're not talking and sitting down and having a good chat with them and doing things that they like when they're young, like, don't expect them as teenagers to be calling you in for chats when they're struggling with things. So I always remember, we probably all know. So I remember just be in their life, know what's going on, be concerned about how they're doing. But I think for me, it was family devotional, sharing the Bible, just overflowing whatever's going on inside you, that they can see that they can see what helps you. You know, that my oldest son, I don't know how many times I had a challenging conversation with him, but I would bring in where I struggled, how God has helped me, and then obviously continue just to share. I think just at home, I think what's happening at home is key. You know what I mean? Like, is that environment like a church, you know, not a church environment, but do they see God in you working in your family? So I think in terms of a small church, I think the key bits really are what they see at home for me. Like, if they bring them up, train them, and instruct them in the ways of the Lord, you're open and honest about your own feelings. You make sure, I think for me in a small church, the key was probably to make sure that they would get time with other UK ministries. Like, knowing you're a small church, So having ties from Belfast's point of view with Dublin, having ties with Scotland, having ties with England, and and Wales and so on, even Europe, been over to Switzerland and stuff as well.
Wow.
So kind of helping them be aware. I think my goal was always make them aware we're a worldwide movement. Yes, we're a small church, but there's a lot more going on out there. So I think just expanding on our church by getting them tied in as much as possible in the small church. I think not seeing the small church as a bad thing, because you can't really hide. What's really going on is fairly obvious to everyone. So obviously just having close ties with other, brothers and sisters that they can look up to. Realizing your limitations, like at the moment I need to talk to, them. I always need to talk to my kids about something. There's always some little thing I want to try and help them with, but you know what? Sometimes it's better coming from somebody else. So the likes of Owen, the oldest, getting him involved with a great brother, Daniel Doyle, who you probably know.
Yeah.
Getting Daniel to meet up with him, getting people that they can connect with regularly. So I think that really, really helped. So at the moment, most of them are still, Zara's she's some difficulties in her own life. So she's still she's struggling with her faith a little bit more, but on the whole, that they're all, doing fairly well. And I think I generally just want to hear them coming to me with questions that they have and thoughts that they have or struggles that they have, I suppose, so.
Fantastic. And a lot of wise words. It sounds like you've invested, in every way in connecting them, as you say, around the UK and around Europe as well. Invest in them in the kingdom.
Yeah,
it is.
I think it was understanding what they need. Like there was a year where I did bring them to pre-teen camps and teen camps. Right. There was one year I couldn't bring Owen to teen camp. So instead of that, I thought I need to bring a replacement in. So I did bring him over. We spent the weekend with the Flemings, who were in Birmingham at the time. So spent time with Andy Fleming and Tommy. And we stayed with them for the weekend because I thought, and we went to the Birmingham church and the Leicester church. So I tried to replace what he was missing that particular year, because I know you got kids. There are times when they want to talk to you, and then there's times when they don't. But being away for the weekend like that, at events like that, and church events or whatever was going on, they often fostered good conversation. So ensuring that there was opportunities to have conversations as they got older, and of course then not overreacting to when they looked like they were going off in the wrong direction, or whenever they're doing things you didn't like or agree with, learning not to overreact. But I've got my wife to thank for some of that as well. I think, to be honest.
Yes, it's a team. Teamwork is important, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can see why God did it that way.
Fantastic. I really look forward to meeting them too. You grew up in the 80s and 90s in Northern Ireland. Can you share a little bit about that? And you said you grew up Catholic, and what it was like just growing up in that Catholic Protestant environment.
No, thanks. It's funny how much you don't want your kids to go through what you went through, yet you wouldn't change what you went through because you are the way you are because of it. I grew up in Northern Ireland. It was not the height of the Troubles, but it was certainly a lot of troubles. The height of the Troubles people often see as like the 70s, but the 80s and 90s was tough. Where I lived is East Antrim, so it's closest part to Scotland, England, if you like, on the map. It's very heavily Protestant, so Unionist are also Loyalist. But where I live was very sectarian. It's a smaller town, so it was a very sectarian place. So those loyal to the UK, to the Crown, to the Queen, all that type of thing, were very hostile to Catholics. So where I grew up, every weekend there was a bomb or a petrol bomb or a fire or a beating or something that caused Catholics to move from some parts of the town into my estate. So my estate became more hardline. I'll not be too graphic in this little depiction here, but I grew up without a dad and was bullied for several years at school, and then I started training in fourth year, and then everything changed. I went the other way then. I really reacted to I was quite quiet and shy. As a result, I was kind of, easily abused, if you like. Even where I lived, was that there was so much sectarianism and injustice. I just to fight back against everything that I'd seen. So I had from about the age of 17, 18 onwards, I had a few very tough years. I did run around with people who'd come out of prison. I'd seen my people and my families, you know, beaten, put in hospital, all this type of thing happening regularly. My best friend's dad was shot dead by paramilitaries. All these types of stories. But I think I was driven by injustice. I mixed marriage, you know, dad was a Protestant, my mom was a Catholic. Didn't know my dad, but obviously I knew his family. So say I was driven along by injustice. I needed to do something about what I was seeing. So for a time in Northern Ireland, I did run with the, you know, paramilitaries and crowds that were hell-bent on violence. And at that time, I thought, well, this serves its purpose. We must fight back. But what you begin to realize is even though there's this surface ideology, when you dig below the surface, it's really just criminal elements. And that's not what I was about. I was about dealing with injustice. That's what was at the core of what I was trying to do. And I say that as someone who really could have went down a completely different path, a very, very different path. And I had tried at different times in my life to almost get involved, but was steered away from it, miraculously steered away. And I've had a few lucky escapes. At several times I should have had crowds, had they seen me, I would not, you know, be sitting like this today probably. So there's a few hairy moments, but I think, as I say, my core at everything was a sense of fighting against injustice. But I realized the people I was running around with, and it was more about revenge, anger, criminality, you know, getting ahead, beating somebody else. It wasn't really what they were doing. At one of my worst times in Northern Ireland, whenever even the police, some members of the police were sectarian, I was actually beaten up by the police, thrown in the back of a van and brought to the police station, where they sung loyalist songs to me on the way down. Wow. So at this time, some of the news stories, it only came out on the news very recently that 10 people were shot innocently in Belfast. That was on the news this very week. And there were stories like that at the time. And you thought, well, what can I do? And if I ever write a book, it might be based on some of this stuff in the future. And it's basically going to be called Divine Justice. Because the bottom line is, to me, either there's a divine being who will bring justice at the right time, or there isn't. If that divine being isn't there, then I'll go after justice myself. Sounds pretty harsh, but that's what I'll do. If there's a divine being there, then it's not up to me to deal with this. And I need to follow his ways, because I'm actually not much better. In dealing with injustice, you can end up hurting somebody else, and then they need justice on you. So it gets very messy. So it's a very long-winded answer to your question, James, about Northern Ireland. But I think this background to me was a very helpful one. At a tough background where I had to get sort of strong to survive, and it definitely developed the fighting spirit in a good sense, I think. After being, as I say, feeling mistreated for so many years. So that was a bit about how it was and how it affected me, I suppose.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for being vulnerable. I'm amazed, you know, the cross you've had to bear with that life. It just comes across as it had been so easy to have been consumed by hatred, with that, all of that injustice, and yet how it's seems to have driven you to justice, you know, and to fight for justice. And thank you for sharing.
I mean, there was a few key moments where things, as I say, could be very, very different. That night, after I was brought to the police station by police who'd beaten me up, at the time I wasn't doing anything wrong. I mean, I'm not saying I never did, but that particular time I wasn't. But as I got out, they let me go early, actually. And actually, for some reason, one of the police officers, who was very nice, gave me a lift home again, which I hadn't thought about till recently. That really helped me. But I remember phoning my mum to tell her what had happened. And I remember at the time anyway, I probably really broke her heart with how I was living my life at that point. But I remember her blaming me for it. And I remember just being full of absolute vengeance at that point. I'm like, you know, my mentality was, no one is going to abuse me, put me down. After being bullied for several years, this was my mentality.
Mm.
I will deal with the world. If I die in the pursuit of it, so be it. And I remember talking to someone that day, and believe it, this embarrasses me to say this today. He talked to me about where I could go to get weapons. That was the type of conversation I was
Wow.
having with him in a field in Larne, where I came from. And I remember having pivotal moments where I needed to make a decision. Either you're going to go down this path, or you need to look at this and think, is there a different way here? Where is this going to lead me to? Am I going to cause pain to others?
Mm.
And luckily, thank God, I chose a different path. And it ended up obviously being a very different path, because even since that time, I've heard of friends who didn't end up taking that path. So yeah.
Wow. Well, it really makes me think differently. I mean, it does make me think about Jesus and how Jesus in the apostles, he had a zealot, a kind of paramilitary guy as one of the 12, and
yeah,
how things don't change in some ways.
Yeah, well, it makes me think of Paul. I mean, I don't want to put myself with Paul, but Paul was a murderous rampage to kind of deal with the Christians. He was completely misguided. But I think within him, God's seen him a very passionate man. He's driven by passions. Whatever he's passionate about, he'll go after it with all his heart. It's misguided at the moment. It's as misguided as you can get. But if I can steer this person onto the right path, he will be the one who brings Christianity to the world. And no surprises, that's exactly what he did. So it's amazing to think of how God looks past this external person, the rage and everything that they're filled with. They need to change. I needed to change, but I think God definitely looks at the heart. And 1 Samuel 16 verse 7, I think it is, God doesn't look at the outward appearance.
Yeah,
when he
about Saul and David.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, just about followed that one. Thanks.
Brilliant. I'm glad.
Yeah, no, great. And it's great that you got Paul in the New Testament as it sounds like he's your hero, your biblical role model to try and follow. He's
the last person you would think of, isn't he? I mean, if it's someone going around the streets today killing everyone who goes to our church, that lives the life that we live, and they're on a murderous rampage to get rid of us, you think that's probably the last person you could see being the representative and ambassador of that movement. And yet it just shows God's grace. Paul, the worst of sinners, and I must admit that helps me, being the worst of sinners. I knew that what I'd done, how I'd lived, how I wanted to live, what I'd wanted to do, I knew that I was in need of much grace. But at the same time, God can use me. So I suppose, I'd certainly relate in some of them ways.
Fantastic. Can you tell me a little bit about the Belfast Church and how it's going? I have visited Belfast for the wedding of a disciple, Caroline, and I've been to a joint meeting, two meetings, I think, of the Dublin Church, one which was joint with Dublin and Belfast, but that was 10 years ago and 20 years ago. So I'd love to tell me a little bit about Belfast.
Yeah, funny. I must have missed you, James. I'd love to have seen you. Yeah. As I say, I've been in Belfast the entire time. I think it's only maybe one or two other members who've been here the whole time that I've been here. It was around the peace process, 1998, Good Friday Agreement, that the church was sent out to Belfast. There was a church in Dublin at the time, and I've been here since the year 2000. I mean, we've had several changes in leadership, but there's a few core, like a lot of churches, of people that have been here from the very start. I think the church is doing really well. We have the Lees, Richard and Tessa, that lead the church at the moment. We've had a few interns and lots of, I think in the last few years, we've had more disciples moving from the UK to go to university in Queens. I think it's been big changes, obviously, since the peace process 1998, and particularly the last 10 or 15 years. So it has, the church is probably around, if you include the kids and all as well, it's probably around about 50 people or so at this point, maybe slightly more, slightly less potentially. So it has grown a bit over the years for sure, with Mull and Joe Price that led the church for many years as well. So we've had fantastic leadership, fantastic help from around the UK. I feel like partly through Zoom and lockdown. We're more linked in than we've ever been before,
Right.
which maybe God's brought this about through lockdown, which has been a good thing. So that's all been good. So I think we're typically known, I would say, as being a very evangelistic, outreach-based church. We're not always as strong in maybe giving or maybe, so should I say, like prayer, but we are notoriously strong with Bible study and knowing the Bible. And I think some of that came from, well, Northern Ireland. As soon as I say Northern Ireland, in Europe we think religious. Ulster says no. Lots of mantras and people shouting out scriptures. So you needed to know the Bible on the streets when you're sharing your faith in Belfast. I mean, it's changing. It is changing, but you need to know scriptures. People are going to often throw scriptures out to you. So my first 10 years, particularly the first 5 years of sharing my faith in Belfast, faith alone. So all I would hear is Protestant doctrines and so on, and we'd have to chat about that and learn. So you needed to know your Bible really well, is what I would say in Belfast. And often, anyone that we were dealing with in the UK would often like to come to Northern Ireland because it almost sharpens you evangelistically, in terms of how do I answer all these queries that are coming my way, that type of thing. So, yeah.
Wow. Well, maybe that leads on quite well then to maybe explains a bit about how you've, developed the teaching. But that's moving on to that. What would you describe is the gift of teaching? What is biblical teaching?
Yeah. There's the function of biblical teaching in the sense that it's to try and, I think, steer the church. Like I think of Galatians 1 about, I'm astonished that you're quickly deserting the gospel, which is really no gospel at all. Like a lot of the New Testament was written dealing with aesthetics and people who were teaching false doctrines about the deity of Jesus. So that's going to happen in every age. So teachers need to be able to steer the church. They need to be able to keep the church almost like an anchor in the sea. They need to be able to keep the church grounded, regardless of what culture or context come their way. That they hold fast to the doctrine, regardless of the tides and the changes, and particularly pertinent at the moment. But I'd probably say that anytime you were to interview me. So I think you've got to be strong in your doctrine, strong in the truth, and be able to hold to it almost unemotionally, but at the same time be able to speak to your hearers. I think of Paul in the scriptures, got into the synagogue or in Athens, and he was able to talk with his hearers. He's got to be able to relate. It's like preaching a sermon. I've got to be able to connect with people and not just fire out my mantra. I've got to be able to connect with people. So I think the teachers have a huge job to be able to keep the church going in the right line and not get pulled off into the world, if you like. Well, like I think of Joshua, before to go into the promised land, and he went through in the book of Deuteronomy, went through the laws again. Look, here's what we need to remember. Yourself, probably as a triathlete, myself entering powerlifting competitions a few years ago, you play by the rules. What are the rules? I think there's that. So I think the role of teacher, don't know if you want to ask me about this yet or not, but maybe the characteristics of teachers. Yeah. Maybe you want to ask me that in a minute or whatever. But,
no, go on.
But I think, yeah, while I'm rambling on, the role of teacher. I mean, I think for myself, I think for years I've almost tortured myself by overthinking. So I'll always be analyzing everything. If there's nothing to analyze of any importance, I'll analyze nothing that has any relevance. So but I began to realize this inquisitive mind can be put to good use. In fact, maybe you've got it for a reason here. So I often find teachers, it suits people who just think a lot, analyze, as my wife would say, overly analyze things. You need to know the whys. You need to know the details. You need to know how something works, why it works that way. And then as a result, then you help to teach other people who don't necessarily think like that. I think, I think the role of teacher is supremely important, not necessarily more important than other roles, but it's hugely, hugely important. But it's hugely, hugely important that those who have that gift recognize that they've got that gift by, again, noticing some of these characteristics in themselves. you're often fairly studious. You like to read, you like to learn.
Mhm.
I think that's it. The sign, I'm not talking about all the signs at this point, but just some of the signs are you actually love to learn. And these are the things I identified in myself. Those who love to learn will often end up teaching. Not teachers with a large T necessarily, but again, there are more things than that now, but yeah.
Great. And it's a bit of I get the impression it's a pretty tough road to follow. And I was looking at James 3 verse 1, which says, not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. Wow. I mean, with that warning, it's definitely not the easiest role or gift to develop. And I just wonder how you feel about that scripture. And
yeah, I think I actually really love that scripture, and I think it is true that not many people should take on the role of, again, many people will teach with a small t, but to be a teacher as such. And I think it is because you are. So in work, I am a regional clinical coach. So I apply the PIP guide, so the DLA sort of disability guide set by governance. And I apply that guide to help other people understand it. So there's a lot of responsibility comes with that, as there is teaching God's word and applying it. People will follow you. People will follow your lead. They'll follow what you say. So you can't be flippant. You can't just say things based on emotion. You can't just say things because you feel a certain way on a certain day. You've got to be very grounded. You've got to understand the outcome of what you're saying, but at the same time not be overly influenced by the outcome of what you're saying. So I think you will be judged more strictly. You're the one that's talking about how do you apply this. If a teacher comes out and says, well, you know what, I think we're following this scripture too rigidly, we should look at this scripture a bit more, and the practice of the church changes, there's a lot resting on that, on the direction of the church. So I think they will be judged more strictly, 100%, and therefore not many people should be doing it. I think it would be a terrible place if in the church everybody was chipping in all the time in order to lead the church in terms of teaching. But I think the way around all that, given that not many people will be teachers, is that and the Bible talks about this being tried and tested. So and maybe I'll get this, maybe other your questions, but it's like you've been through the furnace a little bit. You've been tested. Your motivations have been tested. Because I think anyone that wants to be a teacher won't get there overnight. In fact, it'll take a long time. And in fact, you'll probably have been rejected for quite a while. You'll have been overlooked for quite a while when you think you shouldn't have been. So if you're still doing it, there's something about that. And I'm absolutely like that. So you had a follow-up question to that scripture, James?
Which was, how have you developed how you developed this teaching over the years, over 21 years?
21 years a Christian. Yeah. Do you know, it's actually, I was going to say it's very interesting, but it's very interesting to me. Like I say, I left school with nothing, really. But I was always being told you got the potential. And I always felt like I had a quick mind. I grasped things quite quickly, generally speaking. But I started studying the Bible after I became a Christian. And I would usually read for about 2 hours every day. And I just could not get enough of reading. As a result of that,
Bible and books, or
reading the Bible predominantly, but then also with commentaries, history books, and all this kind of stuff. Eventually, I went on and did physiotherapy, only because I realized how much I love to learn. So I went to university to physiotherapy. I'm now doing a master's in biblical studies. And my role even in work today has came about from just an urgency to read, to learn, to grasp something, and then communicate it to others. But again, I only started doing what I'm doing now really about 6-7 years ago. I remember sitting in my physio department. I remember thinking, we've all got strengths and weaknesses, but I loved assessing people. I loved asking questions to be able to diagnose someone. My favorite detective fictional character, Sherlock Holmes. Right. I love drawing people out, drawing out the situation with wise questions And I love that aspect of physio. But I used to sit in the physio department and I'd be sitting there reading the Bible every opportunity I get, thinking about how can I help people become Christians. And I remember thinking, somebody said to me, a Christian said to me one time, he says, "Are you studying for an exam or something?" And I was like, "No, I just felt God wants me to do this. And I love doing this so much. And I just got convinced I need to keep doing this. And I can help people with their aches and pains as a physio, but nothing's as important as helping people spiritually, helping people get salvation. Like, it's a short term where a mist that appears, then we vanish, and that's it. I'd seen people in my life pass away unexpectedly and shockingly, that there's nothing more important that I can do than help people become Christians. So I've always felt called to ministry, I must admit. But my driver to do apologetics, which is I'm doing now, is the fact that I felt like Christianity, it's almost like there's the Premier League of ideas, and Christianity's in the Vauxhall Conference division. It's like, it's just, sorry for people who don't understand that reference whatsoever, but you're in the lowest league possible. You're just, the ideas are rubbish. It's only for people who are weak and need a crutch. It doesn't hold up in the marketplace of ideas. It's foolish. I just thought that's simply not true. I just know that that's not true. And there are intelligent, intellectual people who can stand up and make a coherent case for Christianity that makes complete sense. In fact, Paul said it, 1 Corinthians 15, if Jesus did not die and rise again, forget it. It's absolute nonsense. It's based on a historically verified event that took place. And if that didn't take place, it's absolute rubbish. So I remember thinking, I need to make a case for Christianity. I need to deal with all the objections, because if it can't stand up to these objections, then forget about it. You know what I mean? Like, and I suppose I'll ramble on too long here, James, but one of the things that drove me into apologetics and defending Christianity was my own doubts. So I had my own doubts. One of my own doubts, the biggest doubt that I had, was this idea that God, and you'll hear this out there, God has put us in this world. We're fallen, we're sinful. We need his help, but there's nothing we can do about that, because, hey, we've all fallen. What human being isn't immersed in sin and needs help? So it's almost like we've been put into a negative situation, whether we like it or not, and there's absolutely nothing we can do about it. And then we're guilty if we don't sort it out. However, the solution to this, because that bothered me for a time, but I read Ephesians chapter 1, 1 Timothy, and there's two other references as well, where God says Jesus was in his mind, the salvation that Jesus would earn, that we would be holy and blameless before the creation of the world. So it said that God, in God's mind, we would be holy and blameless before the world would be formed, before we would fall, and before we would be seen as sinful. So in other words, before we fell down, God had already got the solution in place anyway. So that was just the first of many solutions to doubts that I had, where I thought, this is an answer.
Okay.
That answers that problem for me.
Got you. So you studied this out in order to answer your own questions, doubts, concerns.
Yeah.
And then you start going, I need to share this. Is that? It's
pretty accurate. I mean, I'm renowned for anything I read, I've got to tell somebody. You know, I've got to let somebody know about this. I am very pragmatic in that sense. And yes, I needed to share that one. But there was a lot of other ones knocking around as well. You know, you feel like you reach a wall intellectually. You know, Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. We're all a byproduct of our thoughts. If you're anxious, if you're worried, or you're out there living life, living your dream, it's a result of your thoughts. You start to have doubts, things that hold you back. I was like, I don't want these things to hold me back. So I investigated them. And it wasn't a case of self-fulfilling. I just read what I want to read. I went thinking there's no solution to this. And in several cases there was. So I just thought, I want to do this for other people. You know, what would beat this? So yes, that's what got me started on the path that I was on, the desire to help people answer their doubts, and seeing young people leave the church, young people leave their faith. People would say, how did they get talked out of it? They never got talked into it. They never dealt with their doubts. They never investigated. They weren't like the Bereans, where they examined to see if this is true. Just encouraging people to deal with their doubts. So that's some of there's a lot of practicals then as to what happened, but that's just some of the the drivers behind why I ended up starting up That Bible Guy.
Great. Yeah, and I'd love to lead on to that. Because That Bible Guy is your YouTube channel and website and podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about when? I love the term That Bible Guy, and it's great. And I love you being in your shed and doing it from there as well. It's got a great presence. And can you tell us a bit about that and when you started that and doing the videos and all of that, and how it's sort of rolling and becoming more and more effective, and your followers?
Yeah. Thanks so much, James. It's funny when you say that, because it just instantly reminds me that and I know it's cliche to say this, but I really mean this. It's all thanks to God, because so much of it, there's strengths of mine in there, but there's also massive weaknesses that other people help me with. So I'd set up a blog, first of all,
right,
to write down my convictions and share with some people. So I set up like a website called Prepare to Answer. Didn't know what I was doing. I'm not technically minded that way, IT wise. So I set up a blog, and I've been doing a blog for a few years. For a few years, I've been, excuse me, talking to people about what I was doing. And I'll be honest with you, for years, no one knew who I was. No one was really that interested in what I was saying. It felt like, you're trying to talk to people, but everyone's talking to people they already know. With the greatest of respect, who are you? And that's fine. And I'll maybe get that in a moment. But so I suppose essentially last year in lockdown, I was encouraged to do some videos. I tried YouTube a year or two before this. I watched myself in video. I didn't like the lighting. I didn't look the way I looked. I'm a bit too vain. And I'll be honest, I've had to deal with that repeatedly. But so the lighting, I didn't like the way I looked and all these kinds of things. I thought, I'll go back to podcasts. Just speaking maybe. So blogs ended on the podcast. But I was encouraged to do a video. So I did an Isaiah video last year, started an Isaiah series on YouTube. I was encouraged by Mulligan Price and many other people to do that. And I suppose as I did it, I enjoyed it. I tweaked things as I went along. I set up the camera differently. I'd got a little space to do it in. I'd kind of got a bit of advice on how to do it. And as a result of that, so years before this, I'd went down to 4 days in my job, with the hope being that I could do a 1 day of ministry. Now, I must be honest, I had several years of struggling a bit financially, more than I probably should have done, but that has changed a bit. So I had 1 day a week where I was able to do that. So I was doing the videos, and what happened as a result of that is friends helped me. They picked That Bible Guy. So friends of mine, James Hanna in the church here, had helped me with his children and others, the idea of That Bible Guy. They got the logo going. So I'm thanks to other people for this. I am not really creative. They came up with a name. They came up with a logo. And James also advised me about Patreon. So Patreon is a crowdfunding site. So within about 2 months, the YouTube channel was growing, and I was able to set up a crowdfunding site, Patreon, which now brings up almost a couple £100 a month, which automatically helps support me in that ministry day. So I then repeatedly kept praying, because it was still hard to sustain financially. And I remember praying in December of last year about my direction, because I was offered a better job in work, promotion. And I remember thinking, right, I could take this. This is actually amazing. I could take this promotion here, but I don't want to let my ministry go. So in December, I remember going out to pray. I was 50-50 on whether I was going to keep doing the ministry or not.
Wow.
Possibly 50. I thought I'd do it in some fashion, but not growing it, and not at the level I am at the moment. I prayed a lot, and just about a few days later, about a week later, after my wife helping me to ask these questions and find out about it, I was asked and spoke to Mohan, and I was employed 1 day in the ministry per week as a teacher for the UK, which was just amazing. The job that I was going to take and stop doing the ministry, I then also got, but they let me do it 4 days a week. Right. So I'm now doing that in work. So, and since that time, because I'm now employed 1 day a week, I get the crowdfunding site, the YouTube channel's growing. I'm regularly teaching in other places. It's brought to mind prayers that I had, where I was on praying in nearby Greenway, and I prayed, God, give me the opportunity to teach. Give me the opportunity to teach, Father. Not because anything special about me, not because I have to say something that no one else can say, but you've filled me with the drive to want to say something to people. So I don't believe you put that there for me just to do nothing with it. And I'm only saying this because recently I've had so many, 15, 20 different regions I've preached and taught in the last, 6 or 7 months. All thanks to God. So I say some of this to acknowledge the fact that I didn't come up with the logo. I didn't come up with the name. I didn't know about Patreon. I wouldn't have done YouTube had somebody else not told me. I would still be here in the dark. If my wife hadn't told me to ask about the ministry stuff the way I did, I wouldn't have asked. So I owe so much of anything I'm at right now to the creative skills of other people. So I suppose it's nice to be able to say that.
Wow, that's an inspiring story to see how far. And I suppose it's the one to kind of ask advice and listen to it as well, and how God works. But it really feels like God's kind of rescued and more than rescued you. It's open up the floodgates of heaven to do this thing which was on your heart, and this gift. Great.
Absolutely. I felt like at times I was almost giving God an ultimatum, and I wasn't. And I tried to keep stressing to God, this is not an ultimatum, not blackmailing you, God. But I remember I went out and prayed fervently, day after day. God, if you want me to do this, show me. If you want me to go back to work in 5 days, because I know what I'm like. I knew what, and I'm maybe a bit like yourself, James. I know the way you are. I can see what your triathletes and every triathlons you're doing and all this stuff. I knew my own heart. When I go after something, it's 100%. Yeah. So if I leave this ministry stuff and go back to my physio, I have my own business in strength and conditioning physio. I have my own plans and work. If I go and do them things, I'll go and do it with all my heart. And that's why I knew the ministry then probably would die. So if you want me to do it, God, just show me, make it clear, and then I'll go after it with all my heart. But at that time I was like, I don't know what way this is going to go here.
Wow. Fantastic. Moving sort of away from that to kind of more practical things for those people who just want to deepen their knowledge of the Bible, just to have a good quiet time. Is there any advice you can give to somebody who's, I've been there and I have friends who just like are struggling to read their Bible each day and to get something out of it. Is there any advice you can give to them?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because everybody's different places on the spectrum. Yeah. And you know what? We're all in different places in the spectrum in terms of our own lives. So even if you are naturally a good learner in your academic, you may still have ups and downs anyway. But I mean, I use my wife as an example often, who would admittedly say Bible study is not her strength at all. And yet there's times whenever I'm the total opposite. And then what I've done for her specifically is I've kind of asked myself, I suppose I'd say to anybody, just be real about where you're at, first of all. You know what I mean? And be talking to people that are hopefully asking you about it. Be real about where you're at. Okay, I'm not reading, or I'm only giving it so much effort, or I'm not giving it enough time. And then I suppose recognizing the importance of God's word. So it may be studies that somebody else needs to do with you. It may be a lesson you need to learn about. But I suppose you're probably in a position where you need to ask why you are where you are, your Bible study, and that it's not great. And what would move you on? So what is it that would make you, so almost looking back, we did a course a few years ago called Sanctified Discipling, and it was looking back at past victories. So when was your Bible study good before, and why was that? You can do this again, but what would it take? What would have to change? I suppose I'm saying that to say it would reveal the weakness. It's kind of like you came to me with an injury. My goal as a physio was to cause pain, to see where the structural abnormality is. So where's the flaw line? This is where my mind goes mad. But where does the problem lie that you're not having it at the moment? Identifying that first of all. But then I suppose with my wife, I've printed out a monthly reading plan for her, and that works really well for her. It's an external cue to remind her to read. But I think for the person who's struggling to have a good Bible study, having a good Bible study, I think it seems like the thought of going and reading about a historical book might not inspire them. It needs to be something that meets their needs. So what are they struggling with right now? So something topical. in the Bible? What are they struggling with right now? What's their doubts right now? What's their aspirations or dreams right now? Well, what does the Bible say about that? Because it's almost like they're all, I mean, I don't know where this person is in the spectrum. We're dealing with a wide spectrum, but I imagine them almost a little bit like somebody in the world that thinks the Bible's became a bit irrelevant to them. It doesn't really speak to them anymore the way it maybe did. And that's the way the world sees the Bible. It's this book that doesn't really make sense and it doesn't really speak to current times. But we know that's not true. So they need to fall in love with it again by realizing that God has a word for them today. I'll tell you what, if you are watching this and you want a bit of advice, I have just remembered a time in my life when it was really bad. I lived, and my youngest daughter was just born, sleepless nights, really struggling. Me and the wife weren't getting any time. Things weren't easy, working as a physio full time. And I remember days were going by and I wasn't reading the Bible. And if I was just reading it to get by for 5 minutes. I set myself a plan. I wanted happiness. I wanted joy. I wanted to have what I had before. And I remember at nighttime, I would go to, before I went to bed at night, I decided, this takes some faith. I'm going to sit and read the Bible. I'm going to read the same passage over and over again till God shows me something. Till something stands out that I need to hear. God, speak to me here. You know what I mean? Not an audible voice, but speak to me. God, make it clear what you want me to see here. And I'll never forget that. I remember sitting reading at night, and of course, 3-4 times reading the same passage. I kept praying. I read and I read and I read. And the most exciting times of my Christian life have been when you read the Bible and something specifically speaks to you. And that happened again. And that helped me at that time to get past that sticking point. So inevitably, a bit of work is required, a bit of faith will be required, but God will not let you down.
Yeah.
Dig in, put God to the test almost by giving him your heart just to read for that time. Pray about it. Keep praying, keep reading. Something will stand out. So something will speak to you, and again, next to that, get somebody who is strong in the scriptures who can maybe do a Bible study with you maybe as well. So yeah.
Fantastic. That's great. And I mean, that's really helpful. And in a similar kind of way, I look back to the first time I was asked to do a class in church, and you see people who have been asked to do their first lesson on a midweek, or it might be or it could be their first Devo or the first family Devo or something like that. What advice would you give to somebody who's trying to prepare something, maybe particularly a midweek class on a biblical topic? What advice would you go with somebody?
Yeah, I think the advice I give them now, thinking back myself, I was a Christian about 3 months and I was asked to preach on a Wednesday night, and it was from the book of Job, and it was called No Compromise. And the reason I did that particular lesson was that was my favorite phrase.
Right.
So if you're going to speak on something, start with something that is a conviction. So if you have the freedom to pick yourself and you haven't been given the text, I would say, what are your deepest convictions? A bit like what you're sharing with your own series, James, and your own channel, a bit like what I'm doing. What are your deepest convictions? What are your deepest, what do you really believe? One, that you really believe in, but two, what do people need to hear? So I suppose not to think too deeply about it if it's your first midweek and you just want to get the experience. So, you don't want to expect too much of yourself, in the sense that, look, don't beat yourself up. Understand you will get input, but it's all about growing, and that's just the way it is. But I suppose just understand the needs of the congregation as well. You know what I mean? Like, understand who needs to hear this? Is this a pertinent topic? Is this a divisive topic? Probably best not to start with something like that, I would suggest. And again, without getting too heavy about it at this stage, something that inspires you will probably translate into inspiring other people. And again, just as a general rule, I try to think, well, look, exposition, let the scripture do the talking. And this is something that I could probably ramble on about so much longer. I think people don't do this enough. They don't let the inspiration come from the scriptures. We've got to have stories. You've got to have, opinions about it yourself, but just let the Bible speak. interpret the Bible, help apply it to people, but then provide some inspiration, just to keep it simple. I would obviously be helping young people these days to get up and speak. And that's what I would say to them is, look, think of something that's your conviction.
Yeah.
Think about how excited would you be that people would maybe follow what you're saying. And then obviously in that case, get them to write it out and obviously practice it with somebody as well. Practice it with somebody, like ourselves that maybe been doing it for a long time and can give you good positive critique as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think that's really good advice for that. Wish I'd had that beforehand. You mentioned you're doing a master's at the Rocky Mountain School of Ministry and Theology. I've only just heard about RMSMT in the last couple of months, and I do think there aren't that many people in the UK churches who actually really know about it as yet. Could you share a little bit more about that and what it is and your experiences of that and what it does?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right, James. Many people don't seem to realize about it. So it is affiliated with the church and also connected with I think it's Lincoln Christian University, that they obviously are, they're reputable, accredited, becoming more accredited as well. They offer obviously discounted courses, particularly in the third world, which I love, but maybe, and it's still reduced costs compared to masters programs that you could do around the UK or the world at large. But I had started a Christian apologetics course with John Oakes, an Evidence of Christianity site that he runs. I started it with John Oakes, and I loved it. Christian apologetics. I love what I was doing with him. I really enjoyed it. But I think one of the things I realized was I was doing a lot more speaking. I'd set up my own ministry. And I think for me personally, I felt like I want to learn more. I want to grow. I want to be challenged. But you need to speak from a position of relative authority. So in other words, whether we like it or not in this day and age, if you get up and you talk on a particular topic, well, I mean, who are you to get up and speak on this topic? So at the very least, having some sort of credentials behind you isn't a bad thing. So that was sort of one of my motivators. So I didn't keep going with the Christian apologetics certificate that I was doing because I thought I want to delve in deeper into the masters. So I started the masters a few years ago. I started it with Rocky Mountain, with Jake Glenn Giles, and again, very much connected with the church, because it was cheaper option for me, and I could also do it at my own pace. And it's a master's in biblical studies, so I can pick Christian apologetic type courses mainly, along with other theological, historical ones as well. So I think my goals in picking it, as I say, where it was cheaper and it was also, I could do it at my own pace. Turns out I need to move from a snail's pace to slightly quicker. So I am planning to do another course this year, which will be my third course of 12. So I am slowly making my way along, but I'm really looking forward to digging in. As you say, not many people know about it, but I think you're the second person. I've got somebody else to start with it, and I know you maybe started as well, James. So it's great to hear it being used more. I think it's something that needs to grow a lot more, and we need more teachers. The teaching ministry needs to grow generally. We do need to get more qualified. Most of us probably do need to have at least, if not an undergraduate degree, but a master's degree of some kind, or at least be working towards it. If we want to be able to, speak with authority in the world at large, I suppose. Not that we're just doing it for that reason, but it is personally very beneficial as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, exciting. People should check it out, shouldn't they? The website's great. And all the professors are teachers in the Church of Christ, in the ICOC.
They're all teachers in the ICOC, and some of them you didn't know so well, and they're ones that you can then connect with and then even develop a bit of a friendship with them.
Okay.
I know that I've got to know Dr. Kennard over the course of having done church history with him. I've now arranged for him to help us out in the UK, so I've been in contact with him about that. So it's making these connections as well and getting to know people that can clearly call you higher in terms of teaching and understanding the scriptures and so on. People that have been there before you, done that, got the t-shirt, and they can definitely help. So, but yeah, so it's a brilliant option for anybody that wants to dig deeper at a more affordable rate. And I think this is only growing and getting bigger. because, as you say, it's only people are becoming more and more aware of it. I think not the primary reason, but just we all know the events of the church 2003. We know the things that happened in the church. We've all stabilized. We've all managed to get elders appointed. I know that's another conversation. But we've managed to set up the teaching ministry, and schools like this are massively beneficial, for the church. They really are.
Yeah, fantastic. And I believe they also, Dr. Tim Summerlin, who's also a teacher and an elder, they've also got a counselling masters as well, which sounds great. I don't know that much about it, but yeah. But that sounds really useful as well. And that kind of leads on to, what are the areas that you see as kind of the key, possibly the controversial, the major subjects in our family of churches, in the UK and overseas, that the hot topics at the moment?
Yeah, so I mean, you can say hot topics at the moment, and I'll certainly say what I think they are. I think the reality is there will always be hot topics for every generation. For culture will want to pervade on the church. It'll want to tell the church the way it should act and live and be. And this will always happen. So there will always be hot topics. They've changed in the years that I've been a Christian. It seems, I'm sure yourself, James. At one time, it felt like everything I was dealing with was in-house conversations from other Christians. It was other churches say you should take communion like this. Other churches say you should sing like this. Right. So it was a lot of in-house stuff. Northern Ireland was more religious. But I think the hot topics at the moment, I suppose, are probably fairly obvious to most anyone who's watching this at the moment. I think the big topics are, the hot topics are fairly well covered. If you are, one of the church courses that I did in my master's was church history. If you do an overview of church history, and you see that at one point in time, the vast majority of people were believers in God, then you have, more agnostics. Then you have those, atheism was on the rise, and you begin to see where the world goes as it starts to reject God as the prime mover of the world and so on. But anyway, so I think that helped me to understand the way the world's going at the moment. So to cut to the chase, I suppose, at the moment you've obviously got homosexuality, you've got massively gender issues. You've got they really are the main things. I think you've got a lot of social justice issues. I mean, they may or may not have an influence on the church in terms of racism, equality. At one time, a while back, a lot of stuff was slavery. I did do a thing on my YouTube channel a while ago about the top 10 objections to the Bible. And it's interesting how, if I was to do that every year, they would slightly change. So I think at the moment, the hot topics are, for me, the hot topic of the moment is undoubtedly women's role in the church. I think last year it felt like it was more to do with homosexuality and your acceptance of other, sexual orientations. And I think just not being all inclusive, being seemingly selecting one group to do a role over another group. I think they were the hot topics. And I personally, at the moment myself, I'm studying out stuff around the women's role. So I think I'm glad you asked me about this, because I think anyone who plans to teach needs to look into these things. They need to have a conviction on these things. We need to be able to explain why we have that conviction. We need to be able to answer as well. So not just know intellectually whether what's allowed or what isn't, what way the church should go forward, what way it shouldn't, but we should also be able to articulate that as well. I think that's massively important. I think teachers will be people who are, hopefully full of conviction and not swayed by culture, time that we live in. Now, I say that not to say that the minute culture says something, I go, no, the Bible says this and I will not listen to you. That's not, it's to say the Bible, God speaks first. It's transcends culture. So yeah, these are some of the hot topics.
Thank you. And that probably leads on to the next question, which is, if somebody was listening to this and feels kind of their heart burning, or the kind of interest, could I be a teacher, or is inspired by your life, what would be your advice to them? Is there anything? I mean, you've given a lot already, but is there any other kind of final words of advice for somebody who would looking to pursue this, interested in this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would just start with, look, if you feel you've got a calling, talk to people, but don't let anyone put you off. Don't let anyone dampen that. No, with wisdom. So I've already said, yeah, as you say, there's things I've already said, like ask for input, be very open on the lessons you do and things teaching that you do or whatever your plans are. Ask for input, ask for good spiritual wisdom from people you know and respect, and obviously learn from other people. So pick mentors or pick people you know have already traveled that road, that they're already respected in that arena, and try to learn from them. But there's other things I would say specifically, like know your strengths. So like for me, my strength might have been the world of apologetics. I'm very analytical. I like dealing with, doubts. I like dealing with debates. I like dealing with the things that people say about the faith, and it's all centered around evangelism very often. But one of the things I'd say on that though is, how can the church use your strengths? Try to know how that would work. So if the church doesn't understand or know how they would benefit from learning about the things you're rambling on about, which was the case with me, then that's not a good thing. Now, it might take a while, so you've got to be patient. And it took a long time with me for it to ever seem like anyone would want to hear what I said to say about anything. And that sounds like I'm feeling sorry for myself, and maybe some moments I did. But try to work out how does what you feel called to do and the specific strengths that you have, and specifically the material you like to cover and teach about, how will that benefit the church? Why do they need that? Why do they need to know about that? Because clearly they do. God's using you for some purpose. So understand that as best you can. I suppose put yourself out there when you get opportunities. Let it be known what you're doing, so that you can suggest, to not be afraid to get out there and make mistakes. You're in the learning course, I suppose. I think, as I said about being patient, like keep working hard regardless of the outcomes. So I can maybe chat to you about this, James. You may feel at times like you're overlooked. I've lost count of the amount of moments that I said this before to some people about 7 years ago. A brother came to lead the church in Belfast, and one of the first things he did was to take me off Sunday sermons. I wasn't really doing great spiritually in my life, but I still loved to teach. But I wasn't doing great spiritually, and he was absolutely spot on. But at that time, it was very humbling. I'd failed some other things in my life. Things weren't going great. But I honestly believe it's God's way of getting my attention. I believe that God will be training you for something. Like Moses was trained in all the wisdom and power of the Egyptians. I think that God will put us in certain places to train us. So it may be that things aren't working out for you the way you want them to. But if you feel that sense of calling, don't give up. I think that God is possibly pruning you so that you've got, again, the right intentions. Obviously, pray for directions, and pray for opportunities. But I suppose one of the things I'll maybe just finish with, because I could go on all day, is to use what you've got where you currently are, wherever you're at right now. I just did a video yesterday, I haven't put it up yet, on my YouTube channel about David, and about whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as if serving the Lord. Colossians 3:23 or Luke 16:10. Those who are faithful in small matters will be faithful in large matters. If God's looking at you at the moment and saying, how are you using what I've given you? Well, I'll use it really well, God, whenever I get to this stage. Whenever you let me speak to this number of people, then I'll use it more. No. God's looking at you right now and saying, how are you going to use what I've given you right now in the context that you're in right now? So whatever it is you've got, whatever you want to talk about or teach about, use it in the way that you can right now, and don't get disheartened. So some of that might sound a bit vague, and how does that look in reality? As I say, I've went through all this stuff, and I'm only really early in my journey at the moment, but yeah, so hopefully some of that can resonate with some people.
Great. And I do hope there'll be some people who listen in and take that and just go, yes, let me follow those words of advice. Final question. From here, what next? What are your dreams for the future? what are your hopes and dreams? Where do you see it going? Where would you like it to go?
Yeah, that is the question, isn't it? And that's the question everyone should ask themselves on their journeys. I mean, for me, I do 1 day a week in the ministry at the moment. I want that to be 2 for soon-ish, in the next 6 months will be good. And then I could do 3 days in my own job. I haven't seen beyond that, but I suppose it's inevitably in the back of my mind, would I like to do this full time? Possibly. I suppose when the needs seem like they're so vast that it could only be dealt with more hours, then yes. I think ultimately I would rather be doing full time when I think of where would I want to grow the teaching ministry. I want to identify and help to train, as I get trained myself, more teachers who've got that gift, so that we can steady the church, we can direct the church where necessary, we can stabilize the church, we can help members of the church be deep in the word, understand what God's message is, that we can act as prophets. I think personally I have a lot of little things in my mind when I was thinking about speaking to you tonight, things in my mind, like I want to, as I said to you before, have monthly meetings with UK teachers. I'd like to have a newsletter that's put out maybe regularly, talking about all the stuff that's going on, helping other people dig deep, along with School of Missions, have like particular training courses that we could do with people. I'd love to do, I had this idea a while ago, almost like an apologetics weekend, where people from around the UK either come to Northern Ireland or maybe go to the UK somewhere where we go out and share our faith. We put ourselves out there, and then we come back, regroup, and discuss. What did you meet? What were they saying? What does the Bible say about that? You know, we put ourselves in a training area. I remember I was at a talk one time a few years ago, and Ed Anton said, you know, the Commonwealth Games or something, the Olympic Games is on, and you're in the Olympic Games village. So like, we are God's, you know, people, right? You know, we're God's ambassadors. What are we doing to train ourselves, to equip ourselves to go and help this lost world? You know, people go through all this types of training. You know, First Timothy talks about going into the games almost. You know, you put yourself through hard physical training. You know, but we do it to get a crown that will last. So it's almost like I'd love to see that, just more and more training coming about, and more resources. So an improvement in the resources in the website and things like that. And yeah, just for me, my kids all being Christians, being faithful, helping more people becoming disciples, seeing the church in Belfast grow. There's a lot of things I want to see. But yeah, definitely. You know, I think one of the things that dissatisfies, we've had to talk about this before, just to finish. One of the things that disappoints me is people being unfulfilled as Christians. And it's because they're not using the thing that God has given them. They're not using their strengths. And they will not be fulfilled until they do. I want to help people use what they've been given. If you're not a teacher, that's okay. You've got some other gift that you can use to help people, and you can be fulfilled as well as a Christian, as a follower of Jesus. So helping people identify and use their gifts is definitely something I like to do more. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much, Simon. I'm really, really grateful for you sharing not just about teaching, but your whole life. And that's all the reasons why I so much wanted you to speak and to hear that story, because it's so helpful to so many. It's been inspirational to me in the previous times we've spoken. And thank you so much for you joining today, for joining the Life to the Full podcast and YouTube series. If you have any questions for me, or any suggestions, things that we could do better, please drop me a line. My mobile is 07956 854 836. My email is james@thomaswebb.eu. Thank you for joining. And if you have any questions for Simon, which is probably more relevant, do have a look at, go to Simon's That Bible Guy. Is it thatbibleguy.com?
.org is the website, and then YouTube, just stick in That Bible Guy.
Yeah, Bible Guy. And there's a link from the YouTube channel as well for a comment.
Yes.
Wow. So so I'll shove the difficult questions over to Simon, definitely. But I do thank you for joining, and I do hope and pray you get great joy and insights from God's words. Even what Simon was talking about from quiet times or preparing a class as well, and that you use that word powerfully and effectively to help others. And I pray that you will live life to the full. Amen.